I strongly recommend that you read Casey Quinlan's piece over at Think Progress. But I think that we should go a step beyond this. She said efforts to stop people with histories of domestic abuse from buying or possessing firearms have had mixed results because our laws don't recognize how abuse works, who is targeted, or what behaviors lead up to violence. Excellent point. We've got a caller on Free Speech TV. Joy in Crescent City, California. Hey, Joy, what's up?
Hello, Mr. Hartmann. I have been listening to you for years, and I'm quite honored to be on your program this morning.
Thank you. Although no need. I don't want to seem like Donald Trump in the cabinet meeting, you know?
Believe me, that's not an issue.
Yeah. Okay, so what's up?
Well, I actually made a comment about this topic on my Facebook page. I really feel, I think that by categorizing domestic violence and labeling it as domestic is diminishing the quality of the violence. It's violence. It doesn't matter that it's domestic. And if I used the example on my Facebook page, if a husband beats up on his wife, he gets counseling. If a man beats up on another man, he ends up in jail.
Right. If he beats up his male neighbor, he goes to jail.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. So I feel that by labeling it domestic violence, it's taking it out. It's removing the fact that this is just violence, and it needs to not be labeled as domestic. They need to treat it in the same way they treat any other physical assault that occurs. And by labeling it as a domestic issue, I think it diminishes the ultimate violence that is happening.
Right. So here, Joy, what you're suggesting is parity, basically, that we treat this like all other violence. I'm suggesting, and right now we're below parity. We're treating it as less than violence. I'm suggesting we treat it as more than violence, like we treat rape as more than violence, because of the probability of recurrence of behaviors, right? And
I think that's legitimate. I think that's a legitimate comment on what domestic violence is.
Yeah, and so therefore, either we need to rebrand domestic violence. If that label has been enshrined in laws all over the country, we need to rebrand that essentially as being something in the category of rape rather than in the category of you had an argument, in your family, and seriously go after that, right?
I agree. I think that by like I said, and I don't need to repeat myself, but the violence against women is of epidemic proportions in this country. It's underreported. It is so difficult, and as a victim of rape, I have had to go through the legal system, and this is, it's so prohibitive and so difficult.
Yeah. Wow. I'm sorry to hear that, Joy. Thank you for your call. You really helped clarify it for me. I appreciate it. Thank you very much, Joy. Thank you. And thanks for watching Free Speech TV. There's Sarah in Fort Worth, Texas. Hey, Sarah, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, I'd like to make a comment on, thank you so much for taking my call. Your first caller was, I think, spot on, and we need to stop calling it domestic violence. But I think the other thing that these men suffer from is kind of a self-importance that if you're their girlfriend or if you're their wife, they're their property, which is historically kind of been that way, even, in Europe and every place else.
Oh, we've got a 7,000-year history of that in Western civilization.
Absolutely. And there's no, you're basically their slave, and therefore, and also you're their property, and you're allowed to do whatever you want with your property.
Yeah, and that's I think that kind of thinking, I believe, is the basis of why the so-called domestic violence laws tend to treat domestic violence, which is a euphemism generally for violence against women and children, by men, as a less than assault type of assault.
Yeah.
That's an excellent.
And it's not only beating it. I mean, there's a huge problem in this country with verbal abuse, and
with what abuse? Verbal abuse. Yes.
Yeah, which is equally horrific.
Yeah.
And
well,
so,
its outcome isn't quite as bad, but this is an area where, I mean, this is not unlike I don't see there's not an apparent connection between mass shootings and people who are, because virtually all these shootings are done by white men. There's not a clear connection between mass shootings and racism, but it wouldn't surprise me if it was there and just nobody knew it. But there is this clear association between mass shootings and misogyny. But women, people of color, we're looking at white male supremacy here on display, in my opinion, Sarah.
Oh, absolutely. But I also think it's, well, I guess what you're saying, supremacy, or that they have such a feeling of self-importance, and
Right.
why aren't you paying attention to me?
Yep.
And I think that resonance in the White House is a perfect example of that.
Yeah, and that's the belief in supremacy, belief in one's own supremacy, for that matter. Excellent points all. Sarah, thank you for the call. Eric in Erie, Pennsylvania. Hey, Eric, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Good afternoon. Listen, this thing you've bin riffing on since you started, and by the way, I heard you cry out, hey, where's my free speech people, call in, so I picked up and dialed.
Thank you.
While I was in the middle of a complicated assembly of a new piece of cat furniture for my three-legged asthmatic kitty who can't go outside.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
good on you, Eric.
He's a good boy. In any event, this thing you've been riffing on about, crime versus crime and relating to recidivism, things like, misogynistic and sexual violence. You're absolutely right. It's a pattern I've been discussing with people for years and years, and there's a phrase that I'm sure has been on the tip of your tongue, and now I'll give it to you. There's acts that are crimes under the law, but they're far more a pathology of the human condition. And when you're talking about violence and sexual violence, it's absolutely the sort of thing that has the types of recidivism rates it does because of that.
Yeah.
And to be distinguished from somebody like you or I, if we were in a real tough situation and had to make a conscious choice as reasonable men to steal some food because we were literally suffering from starvation, that's a very different calculation than is a sexual crime. And
Right.
then the other thing is the cycle. You very often, some of the statistics you mentioned, like the domestic violence history for later shooters, that's one that's come up so many times. It's amazing to me how it gets overlooked. But also the fact that many of your adult perpetrators of sexual violence were themselves juvenile victims of sexual violence.
So we have the cycle here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can almost predict certain probabilities of future behaviors from children who were victimized in certain ways, including domestic violence. If they were beaten or if they observed dad beat mom, this stuff it's amazing to me that we as Americans are so anti-science, particularly social science, that when there's an effort, a good thought, an organization, a collection of professionals who want to push policymakers to lean towards early intervention types of programming and training for the kids that you can look at 8, 10, 12 years old and very accurately predict the kind of criminal and drug and relationship and economic problems.
Oh, I think we need to be teaching, as they do, by the way, in Scandinavia. We need to be teaching about sexual violence and what we're referring to here as domestic violence in preschool and elementary school. These behaviors, kids need to be aware of these behaviors when they're 3, 4, 5 years old. And here's why, at least in my theory, Eric, and I'll bounce this off you. You said a minute ago that you felt that this was, part of the human condition, was the phrase you used. And we can look at a lot of other species and see what sort of looks like sexual violence or, male dominance, particularly among primates, although it doesn't typically go as pathologically nuts as it does among humans. And you could probably build a case that testosterone is the most dangerous drug in the world. It's responsible for wars. It's responsible for rape. It's responsible for most violence. And so there's an element of nature in here, but there's also a huge element of nurture in here. And that has to do with, as you correctly pointed out, men who are beaten by their fathers tend to go on to beat other people, to be violent themselves when they grow up. You know, not necessarily against their own kids, but you know, and not all men who have been the victims of physical violence do that. But it is a risk factor. But I would suggest to you that this is in our culture. And just because something is in a, and the fact that it's in our culture is the proof of the fact that it's in our culture is that we treat domestic violence as a lesser crime than regular violence. As Joyce said, you know, if you beat up your wife, you get counseling. If you beat up the guy next door, you go to jail. And so just because it's in our culture doesn't mean it's natural, doesn't mean it should be there, doesn't mean it's a good thing. I mean, slavery was once in our culture, right? For example, I mean, lots of horrible things have been in our culture. And for literally for thousands of years, 7,000 years, slavery was part of our culture. And so I think, and that's why I think, you know, what the Swedes, the Danes, the Norwegians, and the Finns have done is so extraordinary in teaching. There was a great piece, I think it was on Huffington Post a couple of days ago. This woman wrote about, you know, feminism and how she grew up in Sweden feeling fully empowered as a woman. And then she came to the United States and it was like, holy cow, I'm a sex object here. And I'm treated completely differently than I was when I was in Sweden. And it's like they have successfully recalibrated their culture away from that. And it starts in preschool and elementary school. And that's what I'm suggesting. Make sense, Eric?
Absolutely, it does, and I actually agree with you completely. I didn't mean to oversimplify. You just always kind of have to have your eye on the clock when you're on the air with you. This is, I would argue, Thom, this is one of the tip of the spear problems in our culture at large.
Yep.
And it's one of those things like, you know, the claims of the gene for alcoholism or something. It's a combination of predisposition plus conditioning.
Yes, absolutely. And the biggest conditioner is culture. And we have some element of control over that. Eric, thank you for the call. Summer, watching Free Speech TV in Napa, California. Hey, Summer, what's on your mind today?
Oh, hi there. It was your first caller today that just sort of got me to thinking that domestic violence, I would argue, is worse than violence on the street because my home is my sanctuary. This is the one place I should be able to feel safe. It's the last place in the world I should have to be afraid, especially from people who, you know, love me. So, yeah, I guess in a way, besides the correlation, you know, between domestic violence and mass shootings, you know, maybe it should be an enhanced crime for sort of violating the sanctity of my home.
That is a great rationale, and I don't mean that to diminish it in any way. That is a great reason, for an explicit reason, an understandable reason for amping up those domestic violence laws so that domestic violence is considered a larger crime than beating up your neighbor next door. That is brilliant, Summer. That is brilliant. Yeah, that you know, that's the kind of thing that I think everybody can get. I mean, you know, we all grew up in a household, and most of us, and we all want safety and security. I mean, it's a basic human need, and domestic violence shatters that. And you know, as does rape, by the way. It's although not, I guess, you know, rape can be more like, you know, it didn't happen in your neighborhood or in your backyard or whatever. Trying to draw the analogies between rape and domestic violence are not as strong as between a loss of that sense of safety in domestic violence. That's brilliant. Summer, thank you.
Thank you.
Good talking to you.